The Harrove family had always been known for their elaborate Halloween displays. Every October, their front yard turned into a chilling carnival of glowing jack-o'-lanterns, scarecrows, and fog machines. But in 1997, their tradition took a darker turn. That year, Mrs. Harrove decided to carve nearly 50 pumpkins by hand, each one with a different expression, some happy, some sad, but most of them twisted into grotesque grimaces. Her husband, Thomas, joked that the pumpkins looked too real, as if their eyes were following the children who came to admire them. On Halloween night, the Harrove family invited relatives over for a gathering. They ate candy, watched horror movies, and handed out sweets. At first, nothing seemed unusual, until the youngest child, Emily, pointed to a pumpkin near the porch and whispered, "That one blinked at me." The adults laughed, brushing it off as childish imagination, but when Emily refused to go near the jack-o'-lanterns, her fear began to spread. Later that night, one of the carved pumpkins rolled off the porch steps. The family assumed the wind had knocked it over, but when Thomas picked it up, he swore he heard a faint whisper, like the sound of dry leaves rustling. He dropped it immediately, unsettled. Soon after, the lights flickered inside the house. The TV went to static, the candy bowls spilled over by themselves, and the carved pumpkin faces outside began glowing brighter than before, without candles inside. Guests panicked, thinking it was some elaborate prank. But then the real terror began. One by one, the pumpkin carvings started to change. Smiles stretched into menacing grins. Wide eyes narrowed into furious glares. The family gathered at the window, frozen, as the entire pumpkin display seemed to be alive. When they finally dared to open the door, they found dozens of the pumpkins lined up neatly along the path, facing the front door. Each glowing mouth was whispering in unison, "Join us, join us." The smell of rot filled the air, and Thomas tried smashing one with a hammer, but the moment he struck, a black liquid spurted out and hissed like acid, burning the wood of the porch. Mrs. Harrove screamed, pulling her children back inside, locking the doors. But it was useless. The pumpkins were already inside. They filled the living room floor, glowing eyes cutting through the dark. Emily sobbed as one pumpkin rolled up to her feet and spoke in a shrill, childlike voice, "We were carved from your family's soil. You can't throw us away." By midnight, the guests who had come for candy and laughter had vanished. Neighbors said they heard screams echoing down the street, but no one dared check. The next morning, the Harrove house was empty, abandoned, as if no one had lived there for years. Only the pumpkins remained, still glowing faintly in the daylight, faces frozen in mocking laughter. Even today, the old house on Willow Creek remains untouched, but on every Halloween night, locals swear the pumpkins appear again on the porch, smiling, waiting for the next family to carve them. The Callahan family lived in a quiet rural town, known for its rich soil and endless fields. Every Halloween, they held a pumpkin carving contest in their barn, inviting cousins, uncles, and neighbors to join. But in 2004, their tradition turned into a nightmare no one ever forgot. That year, Mr. Callahan had grown the largest pumpkins in town. They were enormous, orange beasts, heavier than a grown man. When carved, they seemed almost human, with deep-set eyes and mouths that looked too lifelike. During the party, everyone joked about how creepy the pumpkins looked, but the kids adored them, pretending the jack-o'-lanterns could talk. By midnight, laughter filled the barn, until one of the cousins, Daniel, suddenly screamed. His arm had been sliced open, and he swore it wasn't the knife. "The pumpkin bit me," he cried, but the family brushed it off as an accident. Not long after, strange things began to happen. One of the carved pumpkins oozed a thick red liquid that looked far too much like blood. Another seemed to shift its expression whenever no one was watching. The Callahans tried to ignore it, keeping the party going, but an uneasy chill filled the barn. Then, little Sophie Callahan pointed at one of the pumpkins and asked, "Why is it smiling at Grandpa?" Everyone turned and gasped. The jack-o'-lantern's jagged grin had widened, curling unnaturally as if it was mocking them. Before anyone could react, Grandpa Callahan collapsed. His chest stopped moving. When they rushed to him, his face was pale, his eyes wide open in terror. Behind them, the pumpkin's glow brightened. The family panicked, trying to run outside, but the barn doors slammed shut on their own. The pumpkins lit up, one by one, casting the room in a sickly orange glow. A deep voice echoed inside the barn, though no one could see where it came from, "Feed us, or we take you all." At first, they thought it was a cruel prank, until one pumpkin split open on its own, revealing not seeds, but rotting human teeth. The family screamed, clutching each other. Mr. Callahan, trembling, shouted that he would destroy them, grabbing an axe. But the moment he struck one, a vine whipped out, curling around his throat, dragging him into the hollow belly of the jack-o'-lantern. His screams echoed for a few seconds, then silence. Only the pumpkin's mouth moved, now speaking in his voice, "I'm still here." Terrified, the family huddled together, but the pumpkins rolled closer, circling them like predators. The children cried, the mothers prayed, but the barn was a prison of orange faces, each demanding a sacrifice. Finally, Mrs. Callahan whispered that they had no choice. They had to feed the pumpkins to survive. That night, the family offered their weakest, an elderly aunt who could barely walk. The pumpkins accepted, swallowing her whole. When the doors finally opened at dawn, the survivors fled the barn, never speaking of what they had done. Years later, locals still tell the tale. They say the Callahan pumpkins grow bigger and redder every year, nourished by something far darker than soil. The Wallace family had just moved into an old Victorian house on the edge of town. They wanted a fresh start, and Halloween was the perfect time to celebrate with their two kids, Matthew and Claire. The attic was filled with dusty boxes left behind by the previous owners, and when Mrs. Wallace went up to sort through them, she discovered something strange. Dozens of small pumpkins, all perfectly preserved, stacked neatly in the corner. Each one had a carved face, some smiling, some frowning, some twisted in terror. Oddly, they hadn't rotted, even though they looked decades old. At first, the family thought it was a harmless leftover Halloween decoration. But that night, when Matthew went to bed, he heard soft scratching above his ceiling, like fingernails dragging across the wood. Claire swore she heard laughter, faint and childlike, coming from the attic. When Mr. Wallace checked, the pumpkins were still sitting there, but now, their faces looked slightly different. One that had been smiling now had a jagged, angry scowl. Another's eyes had narrowed into slits, glowing faintly in the dark. On Halloween night, the family decided to throw a party. Relatives filled the house, children ran upstairs, and eventually someone opened the attic door. The kids shrieked with delight when they found the carved pumpkins. They carried them down to the living room and placed candles inside, lining them across the fireplace. The house flickered with an eerie orange glow, shadows dancing across the walls. For a while, it felt festive. But then the whispers began. At first, it was soft, like the rustle of corn stalks in the wind. Then it grew louder, until every guest in the room could hear it. "We are hungry." One of the pumpkins split open with a wet crack, spilling out not seeds, but long, blackened vines, slick with something that smelled of rot. The vines slithered across the carpet, curling around table legs, wrapping around ankles. The children screamed as the jack-o'-lanterns twisted, their carved faces moving, jaws opening wider than they should. One pumpkin stretched its mouth so far the candlelight inside flickered like a tongue of fire. Its voice rasped through the room, "Feed us, or we'll carve you instead." Panic erupted. Guests tried to run for the door, but the vines pulled them down, dragging them across the floor. A cousin's face was smashed against the fireplace, blood smearing across the glowing pumpkins, which seemed to drink it in. The walls shuddered, the air smelled of iron and rot, and in the chaos, Matthew noticed something that made his stomach drop. The pumpkin faces weren't random, they were identical to the missing person posters he had seen in town. Twisted smiles, hollow eyes. Each face belonged to someone who had vanished. Mrs. Wallace grabbed her children, screaming for her husband to help. Mr. Wallace swung a fire poker at the pumpkins, smashing one apart. For a moment, the vines recoiled. But instead of seeds, the broken pumpkin revealed a shriveled, gray hand inside, clawing outward. The family gasped in horror. These weren't pumpkins at all, they were prisons. Prisons for the souls of the missing. As more shattered, skeletal faces pressed against the skin of the jack-o'-lanterns, trying to push free, their mouths opening in silent screams. One by one, the guests were dragged inside the pumpkins, their bodies folding unnaturally, sucked into the hollow shells. The glow grew brighter, the whispers louder, until the house shook. Mr. Wallace tried to smash them all, but the vines wrapped around his neck, pulling him into the largest pumpkin. His face stretched against the orange flesh, frozen in terror, his mouth silently begging for help. By dawn, the house was silent again. The pumpkins sat neatly in the living room, candles still flickering inside. If you looked closely, you could see the faces of the Wallace family etched into their surfaces, eyes wide, mouths open in a scream that would never end. Locals say if you walk past that house on Halloween, the windows glow orange, and the pumpkins whisper from inside, "We are hungry, who's next?"